There's an oil boom going on right now, not in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or any of those places, but 600 miles north of Montana, in Canada, Alberta, in a town called Fort McMurray, where this time of year, the temperature sometimes zooms up to 0. The oilmen up there aren't digging holes in the sand and hoping for a spout. They're digging up dirt which is saturated with oil. They're called oil sands, and if you've never heard of them, you're in for a big surprise because the reserves are so vast in the province of Alberta that they'll help solve America's energy needs for the next century. Within a few years, the oil sands are likely to become more important to the United States than all the oil that comes to us from Saudi Arabia. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, vehicles which look like prehistoric beasts move across an Arctic wasteland extracting the oil sands. There's so much to scoop, so much money to be made. There are 175 billion barrels of proven oil reserves here. That's second to Saudi Arabia's 260 billion. But it's only what companies can get with today's technology. The estimate of how many more barrels of oil are buried deeper underground is staggering. Listen to Shell Canada Chief Clive Mather.
We know there is much, much more there. The total estimates could be 2 trillion or even higher.
2 trillion?
2 trillion.
That's the number with a T.
That's the number with a T. This is a very, very big resource.
Very big? That's 8 times the amount of reserves in Saudi Arabia. The oil sands are buried under forests in Alberta the size of Florida. The oil here doesn't come gushing out of the sand the way it does in the Middle East. The oil is in the sand. It has to be dug up and processed. They're heated in a cell which separates the oil from the sand. The result looks like something out of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. This oil froth is sent to an upgrader and eventually to a refinery. And once you've done that, it's as good as the oil that comes jumping out of the sands in Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely as good as. In fact, it even trades at a premium because it's a high-quality crude oil.
This mine in general will be in operation for about 25 years.
But then $40 a barrel happened, and the oil sands not only made sense, they made billions for the people digging them. The capital of the oil sands frenzy is a frontier town called Fort McMurray, which isn't in the middle of nowhere. It's north of nowhere and colder than the Klondike, but a boomtown just the same. Brian Jean represents the region in Canada's Parliament. Is this comparable to a gold rush?
I think it's bigger than a gold rush. We're expecting $100 billion over the next 10 years to be invested in this area. $100 billion in a population that currently is 70,000 people.
1 million barrels a day are now coming out of the oil sands, and oil production is expected to triple within a decade. It won't replace Middle Eastern oil, but at that point, it will be the single largest source of foreign oil for the United States, even bigger than Saudi Arabia, which sends 1.5 million barrels a day to America.
When I go to Washington now, they are just starting to pay attention. Surprisingly, in the last couple of years.
Greg Stringham works for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and often lobbies for the oil sands in Washington. He points out that in Alberta, you don't have to look for the oil sands, the earth moves.
When it comes to exploration in the oil sands, you can't drill a dry hole. It's there, we know where it is, they've outlined it, you don't have any risk. But other conventional sectors around the world, there's a huge exploration risk.
The exploration risks are the least of it. Much of the world's crude is in the Middle East, where the instability is deeper than the oil. When Alberta's blue-eyed sheikhs took to Wall Street last summer in their Stetsons to drum up support for the oil sands, their message seemed to be, if you can't trust Alberta, who can you trust?
Alberta is a very good place to do business. It's a very stable environment.
I mean, you're understating it, aren't you? I mean, Alberta is as safe as you can get on this planet, isn't it?
It's a great place to do business.
And they haven't had a civil war for a while.
We haven't had a civil war for a long time.
The bonus for Canadians, aside from the treasure, is the notion that Americans might have to start treating them with a little less condescension.
With their oil, I think we're going to need them a lot more than they need us.
We may appear in Canada to be a mouse compared to the elephant down south in terms of diplomacy or politics, but in terms of resources, we are mighty equals.
What do you think about the Chinese interest in the oil sands up in Alberta?
I first thought they were tire kickers. but I think they're serious buyers.
And the millions of Chinese who've moved from their bicycles to traffic jams are driving up the demand for oil. It's virtually insatiable, and the Canadians want to step up production quickly. What's holding them back is labor, the shortage of it.
We need another 100,000 people here in Fort McMurray.
That's why one oil company has built a runway to fly workers daily from civilization to Fort McMurray.
But why would anyone want to come work in a place where temperatures plummet to 40 below and the sun sets shortly after it rises in the long winter? Well, perhaps because the oil companies pay some of the highest salaries in North America. Take George Lichty.
It could be up to about, well, around here, maybe 120,000. So it's pretty good.
So you're going to be making 120 grand by the time you're 22. Huh?
Yeah, it's amazing.